One used to be one of the most criticized authors in manga history. For a very long time, people called him a terrible artist because he just wasn't that good at drawing. This almost made him give up his dream of becoming a mangaka several times. And yet, a few years later, this bad artist created One Punch Man, one of the most popular series of the past decade. His work has been adapted into award-winning anime, not season 3, inspired a bunch of creators and changed how people think about stories. But how did someone who could barely draw become one of the most legendary manga authors in history? And what are the things that made him completely different from every other mangaka? All of this started when One was introduced to manga. From the very beginning, it was pretty obvious that One had a gift that most people couldn't see. He was obsessed with telling stories. While other kids were playing, doing homework, even, going outside, One was reading manga. This boy was filling notebook after notebook with the most insane ideas you could imagine. When he was just a little kid, his brain was constantly coming up with these incredible concepts that nobody else even thought about. Until one day, he had a really weird idea for a story. What if there was a superhero who was so strong he could beat literally any enemy with a single punch? That's how a little series called One Punch Man was born. But instead of creating, a regular manga, he started posting his story online as a webcomic, drawing all of it by himself. Now, there's something you have to know. At the time, reading comics or manga online wasn't nearly as big as it is now. We're not talking about massive platforms like Webtoon or something. We're talking about tiny sites like Niche. It was a way for smaller artists to show their stuff. There was almost no chance this was going to work. This One Punch Man thing was just too weird and was probably going to be completely ignored. And at this point, One was genuinely thinking about abandoning his dream. But then, he got his first ever reader. The first ever person to look at his work. And after a while, he got a second reader. And then a third. And suddenly something absolutely crazy happened. More and more readers started stumbling across One Punch Man. And once they read it, they just couldn't put that thing down. Despite all the issues with the unusual story, despite how simple it was, despite everything that should have made everyone freaking hate it, people were completely hooked. Why, you might ask? Because the story was absolutely freaking awesome. One had pulled off something genuinely insane and the webcomic went viral. That's when everyone realized that he had tapped into something super special. His success proved to everyone that this dude had some seriously insane talent. Even though he was at the beginning of his journey, readers were still absolutely obsessed with his work purely because of how incredible he was at crafting stories that felt different from everything out there. So One was doing well and building this huge following, but there was one massive problem holding him back. His art was terrible. If you look at the first chapters of One Punch Man, his drawings were kinda rough. A lot of people agreed that this man's style was very simple, wobbly, and they just didn't look as good as most of the professional stuff that was being made at the time, to be honest. The characters looked like stick figures with super basic facial expressions. The action scenes were kind of confusing to follow, and his backgrounds... Listen, I love the dude, but what is this? In an industry where visual storytelling was always extremely freaking important, One's art was his biggest weakness, like by far. And that was a problem for a very good reason. The brutal reality of the manga industry is that it's almost impossible to make it if you can't draw at least kind of at a decent level. I mean, look at most of the well-known manga out there. Almost all of them look great. So this man had another idea: to keep slowly improving his art skills while simultaneously continuing his work on One Punch Man. He started grinding every single day, and it was tough. Unlike most anime and manga where, characters can go through a training arc and suddenly become incredibly powerful in a couple of episodes, art is something that takes a long time. Like literal years and years of practicing to get better. I mean, look, I've been working on my own stuff for a little while now, and every single step feels like it just takes forever. But One absolutely refused to give up. As he was doing his best to improve, he was slowly getting more and more fans until one day, his webcomic also caught the attention of someone very special. Meet Yusuke Murata, a manga artist who was just browsing the internet when he stumbled across One Punch Man for the first time. The thing you need to know about Murata is that he wasn't just any random artist in the industry. This guy was already a recognized mangaka with some serious success to back it up. Just to give you an idea of, how absolutely incredible this dude's work was, here are some examples of stuff he had made at that point. Yeah, it's pretty freaking good. He was exactly the kind of technically skilled artist that the manga industry loved. We're talking about someone who could draw anything with perfect anatomy, incredible detail, and dynamic action that make your eyes explode. This wasn't just someone who was kinda good at drawing. Murata was legit one of the best artists working in manga. When he discovered One's webcomic with its stick figure art and simple drawings, like everyone else, he read and read and read. He saw something that most people had completely missed. This wasn't just a story with bad art that got popular, this was a genuine masterpiece waiting for the right visuals to reach its full potential. But unfortunately, Murata also had a problem. At the time, he was super sick to the point that he had to live in a hospital. His condition was so bad that he genuinely felt like it was the end for him. But before that happened, he had one last wish. If there was one last thing I could do, it would be to work on One Punch Man with One. So Murata did something that was very rare in the manga world. He reached out to One directly and offered to redraw the whole thing. And that's when one of the most legendary collaborations in manga history started. At this point, both of them knew that redrawing everything was a pretty risky move. There was a massive chance that this would completely fail. They started writing, the first chapter came out, and the result was crazy. The redrawn One Punch Man started in 2012 and immediately became this cultural phenomenon. Murata's incredibly detailed fight scenes, his cinematic panels, his beautiful character design. I mean, those weren't even glow-ups at this point, they were just new freaking characters. Their duo was so good that they even had the time to work on smaller stuff like Bullet Angel Fan Club, Monster of Earth, Cockroach Buster, and more. Murata brought One's vision to life in ways you can't even imagine. You could tell this man knew exactly what he was doing because he didn't just change everything. This guy understood that his job was to make everything look better while still being true to One's vision, which is why some panels looked absolutely epic while others still had this sketchy feeling that made the original One Punch Man charming in the first place. Every single artistic choice he made was carefully thought through to enhance One's storytelling, not replace it. It's the perfect example of a dude who 100% understood the assignment. One kept doing what he was a genius at, writing killer stories, while Murata took his drawings and turned them into some of the most beautiful manga art you could imagine. The success of this collaboration was proof that the traditional way they did things didn't always work. One person doing both story and art, which is so exhausting and often the reason authors like Murata have health issues. Sometimes the most incredible results come from combining a brilliant storyteller with a master artist who could bring those stories to life. It felt completely different from anything else out there and created something that neither of them could have done on their own. With a very talented person now handling the visual stuff, One got creative freedom to do whatever the heck he wanted. And that's when this man unlocked his true potential. Throughout the years, he started collaborating with a bunch of different artists, and that's when things got really interesting. The truth is, most people think of One as just the dude who wrote One Punch Man. But what a lot of people sleep on is all the incredible stuff he managed to pull off after. For example, Mob Psycho 100 is a manga he wrote while working on One Punch Man with Murata. It's the story of this kid called Mob who's got these absolutely insane psychic powers, but desperately wishes he could get rid of them just to be a normal guy. Kind of like Saitama, he's the most powerful character in his story, but he doesn't want to use that power because he's just scared of hurting the people around him. Most fighting manga are built on this idea that having special powers is a good thing. But Mob Psycho 100 said, no, actually being powerful is not always a good thing. One began working on more and more projects, and each of them found new ways to completely destroy tropes that had been recycled ever. Heroes of Fury is the story of a bunch of warriors who are asked to save a princess, but they refuse to do it because she just doesn't look pretty. Until someone changes her poster to this, and suddenly they all want to save her. Versus is the story of a hero who tries to defeat powerful demons but fails almost immediately in the first chapter. After that, his world accidentally merges with several other dimensions that have also been creating their own special anti-demon warriors. Gokuburi Buster is the story of this elite group of soldiers who are hired for a dangerous, epic mission. To beat a cockroach. Yeah, a cockroach. And they fail. In every single story one has touched, these generic tropes that you see in so many stories got twisted into something new. He broke every single rule and somehow still managed to make a story that made sense. And listen, I know that what I've described so far might sound like a bunch of gimmicks and internet memes, but that actually brings me to my final point. Beneath every single joke, every subverted trope, every moment of absurd comedy, one's work always had something way deeper. I think that one of the best examples that shows this is a scene in One Punch Man that, weirdly enough, doesn't even involve the main character. Imagine a monster, overwhelmingly powerful, brutal, and confident because he knows no one can stop him. This is the Deep Sea King. At this point, he's already beaten multiple superheroes effortlessly. Then, a guy shows up on a bicycle. Not a robot, not a fighting expert, not a superhuman. Just a normal man with a helmet and a cheap bike. This is Moomin Rider. They fight and Moomin Rider knows he can't win. Everyone watching knows he can't win. Even the monster laughs in his face because he knows it too. But Moomin Rider steps forward anyway and says, "No one expects much from me. They think a person like me won't be much help. I know that better than anyone. I'm too weak. I'm not good enough. I know that much. I'm aware that I have no chance of beating you. No one needs to tell me, and yet I must try because it's not about winning or losing. It's about me taking you on right here, right now." That's the core of this character. He fights because someone has to, even if it's his last fight. Even the main character, on the surface, he looks like a funny guy. This bald hero who's just so ridiculously overpowered that he defeats every single enemy with one punch and then complains about stuff like missing grocery store sales with the most insane poker face I've ever seen. But the more you watch, the more you realize this is someone who has achieved literally everything he thought he wanted, and discovered that it feels completely meaningless. Saitama's famous deadpan expression isn't just funny. It's the face of someone who has completely lost the ability to feel excitement, joy, or even basic satisfaction from going after his dream. Mob has psychic powers, but he's also a teenager who feels different from everyone around him and doesn't know how to connect with other people. Reagan from Mob Psycho 100 is a complete fraud who pretends to have psychic powers to make money, but he's also this genuinely caring mentor who gives excellent life advice and actually looks out for Mob. The main character in Monster of Earth thinks his dad is ridiculous and pathetic until he realizes that he was completely wrong and totally unable to do anything his dad can. One has this incredible gift for finding the comedy in tragedy and the tragedy in comedy, which makes his stories feel more human than most other stories out there. He subverted every single trope and broke every rule, not because he wanted to be different, but because he loved these stories so deeply. The reason his work resonates with millions of readers around the world isn't because they're about superheroes or incredible powers. It's because they're about human experiences that everyone can freaking relate to. And that's what makes them special.